Phil Harris and Josh Phegan come together in an incredible fortnightly podcast, Dream Big, Move Fast.
A progressive, contemporary conversation on what it takes to be a dynamic thinker, leader, and role model.
Backed with over 2 decades of friendship, trials and tribulations that teach from real-world experience and what it takes to dream big, move fast.
One man practicing sportsmanship is far better than 50 preaching it. New Rockney. Phil, what are your thoughts about that to start off today's episode?
Yeah, great little quote. I think it's probably the essence of leadership, isn't it, Josh? Just in relation to a little bit like the saying, it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. And great leadership is sometimes, or often going against the flow and standing up for doing what's right. So I think great little quote to kick us off today.
And I just think about that inside of any organisation. Like, if you're thinking about sportsmanship, that ability to be able to, see beyond just this transaction and what does it actually mean for the customer? What does it mean for the brand? And then what does it mean for the individual? And often when people are in scarcity mode, they start wanting to chase maybe commissions that are not necessarily theirs and buys that were apparently owned by them. And every single time that you got politics inside of an organisation, all it does is stifles productivity. And what you want to try to do is to get rid of some of that so you can be in a position that you can go and play at your best. Today, we're going to have a great conversation about living life by design. Phil, I think this is a really important topic because it's really easy to wind yourself into things, but it's really difficult to wind yourself out of them. And you got to get really clear about models and what it is that you want to do. What are some of the things that you wish that you had have known before you started that, now on this journey in running Harris and what you've done inside of residential real estate, you go, geez, I wish I had someone say, at least give me some choices. It's either this or it's that. So then I could have made those choices faster, better, maybe less of the errors or more some of the errors earlier, so you could have learnt from them. What are your thoughts?
Probably kind of one of the bigger takeaways for me, Josh, is I think for a lot of younger real estate agents who are looking at moving into that leadership model of running an actual real estate business. Now, a lot of, generally speaking, most of the real estate owners that you see around the country, it's changing a little bit now, but the most kind of started out as a salesperson, progressed and became successful as a real estate agent, and then it seems that the natural progression is then go, hey, I'm now going to go and do business ownership.
And that's a big bridge to cross, right? Because you're still doing a large percentage of the revenue, and then you want to try to diversify that and get more people doing the revenue, and then when someone starts writing more revenue than you, then they want to start to maybe claim that maybe they're more important and, starts to cause some issues and some friction in the business models, right?
Definitely comes with some challenges, but typically that's what the model is. However, it is evolving now. I think you would agree, Josh, we're starting to see a lot more business owners that actually have never sold a home before, but they're coming more with either an education background like a business degree or a corporate approach to running a real estate office. I think tech and efficiency and progression and those sort of things have enabled that to have more kind of a corporate style approach to real estate rather than that traditional model of the business owner being the key lister and seller. But probably I would say the key learnings of what I'd known from the start, I think it would have been more about, and this is a good segue for people to think about their own business, of getting out and maybe just exploring what those business models are. And we were chatting in the car today earlier about kind of what are the models at work.
Yeah.
And we see, financially, the model is the model. Like we know that, one of those models is like if you keep it super tight and small and you're a listing selling principal and generally speaking, you're the primary writer and maybe you have 2 or 3 other good writers around you and you have, a pretty tight little PM department, keep your overheads low. Like that's a highly profitable model, Josh. Then you have a look at businesses that have substantial scale. And if we're talking about owner-operators outside of the franchise, right? But businesses that have scale, some of those businesses like mine, and you think of, Dane Atherton up on the Gold Coast and other large independents like a Brezett Whitney, and, there's quite a few of us around. We have, you need to have that substantial scale where you've now got a non-selling principal. In fact, there might be multiple non-selling directors, but there has to be a pretty big tidal wave of volume behind that to sustain that. And I think a lot of business owners, they start out with, have a look at my business or Dane's or somebody else's and say, hey, I'd like to do that, but not really having an understanding that it's very, very few businesses where you can actually not be on the tool. So I think you need to understand what the model is first, and then not just understand what the model is, but really get inside that model and understand P&Ls, understand profitabilities, understand valuations of rent rolls, what you should be paying.
Which is the interesting conversations you said, that one could be really profitable, but that one's probably about actually building balance sheet and trying to find the mixture between both.
Yeah.
Where like literally it's okay, great. So, if you're going to do something for the long term and you're thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the track as being an exit point, then, what would you actually do in the business model that you got to set up today? Phil, it's an interesting conversation because when you think about living life by design, and you think about, personal success outside of just the business success, you got to be really clear about what it is that you want, and I think that like sometimes the paradox of choice, and I always think about this, that like when you're not well, the only thing you want to be is well. But when you're well, there's a myriad of things that you could want. But the interesting conversation is that when you like narrow down and focus on just wanting one thing and doing it really well, it makes a huge difference in overall success. How important is it for someone to know what it is that they want, and how do they go about discovering that? To make sure that then they can go all in on doing that. Like I'm going to say, or is it, there's too much utopia that all of a sudden you're just going to wake up one day and just say, this is just amazing. I'm sure there's plenty of days where you started out in residential real estate where you didn't actually want to go back in the next day, where I wanted to throw the towel in a bit because it's like it got hard and markets were different and brands were different. What are your thoughts about how you find out what it is that you actually want to do and making those decisions to commit?
Yeah, I think it's not I think we all face it in business, Josh. You certainly have, days on a regular basis thinking, oh, geez, I could maybe just stay at home today and not go into work. But then I think what kind of refreshes you around that, or maybe not necessarily refreshes you, but gives you the kind of the power to say, hey, I'm just actually going to, I'm going to have a business that operates irrespective of feelings. I'm going to run by kind of function and design. But I think that's, from a business perspective, that's where it gets critical around having those big rocks that we've spoken about before as well, like having a structure of, where do you want the business to be in 10 years' time? So what's that big, hairy, audacious goal? And then break it down, where do you want to be in 3 years' time, 2 years' time, 1 year time, and then running a business in quarterly sprints. But holistically, I do believe in having clarity. And by the way, you don't need hundreds of goals, Josh, but I do believe in the categories of the big five of faith, family, fitness, finance, and friendship, and saying, hey, well, if they're kind of 5 categories for your life, it's good to have a few kind of key principles behind those of those flag points of where you want them to be. So I think if you've got clarity over those things, and you don't have to be so religious that you're looking at those goals daily, but I would say in my life, I'm probably looking at goals kind of weekly at least to say, hey.
Or any time you need some motivation and some momentum again to remind yourself of what's important. Like often I find some of the goals I write down at the start of the year, I might not see them, but when I get to the end of the year, like they've already been completed. And they kind of naturally come into the universe. And I kind of like that idea about what I'd go to call like the layering effect. It's like, okay, great, I've got to a level of mastery on this particular thing, but now I'm going to layer something else in to make a more diverse and a more fulfilled life. And if you're in a position that you really love what you do, people are going to tell you. And that's one of the big things that I've always loved in watching you is about the view of continuous improvement and about like, how do I become better? How do I become better in terms of, finding someone to go and date, getting into a position of getting married? How do I become better as a dad? How do I become better now with kids? How do I become better as a business leader? How do I become better in the listing presentation? But you're always working at something to improve, right? As a part of that whole idea of you living that life a bit more on design and having to remove things that no longer serve you well.
I think that kind of probably comes with age a little bit as well, Josh, although I've always been kind of focused on improvement, but probably now you start to have more of a realization that success in life is maybe less about outcomes and more about the person that you're becoming in the process. So if you do have some clarity over goals, over those kind of 5 clear topics that we spoke about, but if the overwhelming current of your life is I'm actually more focused on the person that I'm becoming, I'm going to continue to improve, well, then obviously you can't help but move the dial every single day.
I kind of like that about like, what matters and what motivates. And I do this thing with people at the moment who are, going through that discovery phase and they're uncertain about it. I'm like, well, just open up your phone and take me to the photo sections, and whatever you tend to photograph is the stuff that really motivates you. Because like, if you've got classic cars in there, or maybe, for example, you've got, holiday destinations, or maybe it's your dog, whatever the story is, then that might be things that like really do motivate you. Is about really being around that. And what you want to think about is that like life is actually a position of editing frequently. So you've got to remove the things that no longer serve you well. And you've got to be in a position that you start to think, I've got to start to think that sometimes people and situations come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I'm always been a big one for that. Is like this particular event or this particular thing that I'm doing right now, is that something that's just around for a season? Is this something that's coming to my life for a real reason? Or is this actually something, a methodology or an approach that I'm going to adopt for a lifetime? How important is it, in terms of editing and removing things that no longer serve you well, and really focusing on the things that are going to serve you well for the type of person you want to become next?
I was chatting to my wife about this recently as well, actually. So I think that, and once again, it's something that maybe is a level of maturity or comes with age, but I find myself constantly now, Josh, looking to remove things in my life that don't align with those few basic things that I value so much in my life. So I have a few basic things that I value, like what I said before, faith, family, fitness, finance, and friendships. And anything kind of doesn't really significantly fit into those things. Like my life really seems to evolve around my wife and my children and my business and health and well-being and my extended family and some friends. And so I'm constantly looking at pruning those things to refine them, less about having more, but maybe having higher quality experiences in those areas of my life.
Phil, it's kind of interesting. You go into the photo section of your phone and it goes to show you like the 5 people that you photograph the most. And it's kind of like that's almost like the 5 key people that are a part of that list. And it's kind of an interesting conversation because...
Were yours selfies, Josh?
Is it? No, they weren't, no. But the interesting conversation is that when you think about the top 5, you have a theory about that, about 5 core people in your life. Tell us a little about that theory and how you've used that and what the benefits of it have been and if there were any downsides on that.
In terms of top 5, I've always had a group of people that I've surrounded myself with. I mean, I'd say I have top groups of people kind of externally to my business, but then also internally inside an organisation. They're the 5 most important people to spend time with. But on an external perspective, I think something that I have done very well, Josh, and we speak about this, I think I've got some very good skills in only kind of I'm very good at maybe 1 or 2 key areas inside the real estate space, but I've been very good at being able to outsource and find some really great mentors for different sections of my life. So I've got
a great PT, someone really good to be able to assist you with auctioneering back in the day.
Great people who help me out with health and well-being, people who help with auctioneering. I've now got great people who are great with commercial property. Like commercial property is not my expertise, but I've had people who've been able to help me in that space and help me to acquire and own commercial property. Financials, I've never been great financially. I didn't go to university and do an economics degree and those sort of things, or commerce, but I've got people who are very, very strong financially. So I think, you want to work out, if you get clarity over the goals of where you want to be, you do a strength assessment, say, look, and most people are, unless you're a freak like Elon Musk, who seems to be good at everything, but you work out what your strengths are and say, look, I'm good at these 1, 2 or 3 things. Now, what would be the talent that I would need to surround myself with to who can play a strength in areas where I'm not strong? But in terms of that clarity piece, though, there's obviously a lot of people listening to this. There's a lot of business owners that kind of tune into this. I'd kind of the quick audit, Josh. Like if you, off the top of your head, if you're not crystal clear right now on where you want the business to be in 10 years, and if you're not clear on where you want the business to be in 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, and you're not laser focused on what you and the company needs to achieve in the next 90 days, then I don't think you've probably quite got yourself dialed in on what clarity actually looks like inside your organisation right now.
And how quickly can you turn that? Like if you're feeling that you have not been living by design, like is it literally the beginning of a 2-day retreat with your team and having some really challenging questions asked to get some definition around that to start on that pathway?
I think my recommendation would be first and foremost, do it yourself for a half day. Like you can easily, go off-site, either do it at home or go and book yourself a hotel room in your own city where you are and go and spend, in 5 or 6 hours with a couple of big sticky notes on the wall, right? And just thinking about, that really, really simple 1-page Everest mission that we speak about so regularly, Josh, of saying, well, here's a 3-year horizon, right? But let's push that out to 10. And keep it as simple as going, well, how many managements, how many sales, how many staff, and how much revenue, what would it be looking like in 10 years? Then bring that down to 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. I think if you could get clarity over that would be my first starting point. And then the second point I'd be saying, we get off-site with your exec team, with an external facilitator, not facilitated by yourself, or someone who can actually put some meat and bones and some structure around that for you and start getting some real clarity around that. And I think from a Harris perspective, where we really started to gain, serious traction and serious momentum going back probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, is when we brought in that external business coach, not a real estate business coach, right? As an external person who facilitated and just kept rigorous discipline around getting everybody laser focused on where is it that we want to be and what are the projects that we're undertaking that are actually going to help us to deliver those outcomes. So that would be, starting point for me.
What I love about that though is that how much of what has happened to you has been by design and how much of it has just been, it came your way, not consciously, but because you were already in momentum in other areas?
I think design brought the luck, and
it's like you're in the right locations, right, to be able to meet people and have the conversations at the time.
And at the right time for people exiting businesses or talent who was on the move or disgruntled employees with other places. And I think Jim Collins talks about in one of his books, you know better than me, Josh, he talks something like whatever the name is of that. But, that's all about being in the right place at the right time. Now, you can be in the right place at the right time, but if you haven't got the track record, if you haven't got the proof, then, it limits those opportunities. So I would say that by having really good clarity of of goals in place, having an effective operational team that is executing on strategy and then actually delivering results. So you've got that little flywheel that's building momentum. And then on top of that, an opportunity comes along and you're able to take that because you're in the right position of being able to do so. So it all kind of culminates and come together. It's not one or the other.
Principle, big rocks first. Phil, this is kind of an interesting one about and we've all seen that where they had like the container and it had all the big rocks in it, and then they said, could you fit any more? And they go, yeah, and they put some bigger pebbles in and they all shake it all around, and then they had some smaller pebbles and they go, it's full now, and then they added some sand and they go, it's full now, and then they added some water and then it was full. How important is it for people to, get really clear about what their big rocks are in their life and putting those in priority first in the calendar before they then go to start adding extras? Because we've got a life that's filled with tons of extras, but if the core's not right, it actually doesn't produce much of a life around it.
Yeah, I think that's probably something else, Josh, that I've, one of the few things I've been able to do relatively well is about getting those kind of big rock priorities. So as a salesperson, if you're listening, what are the big rocks? Well, I'd say, first and foremost is your own personal health and well-being. It's like you're on a plane, you've got to do your own mask before you take care of the person sitting next to you, right? So you haven't got great exercise and recovery time in your diary, then you're not going to have the longevity and the sustainability. Okay, now I've got exercise taken care of. What's most important for me as a salesperson is probably protecting your prospecting time. And so like if you're a fit and healthy person and you're prospecting every day, like largely you're going to carve out a pretty successful career in real estate. Now, if I go to business ownership, what are the big rocks I need to have? Well, first and foremost, health and well-being. And I go, well, secondly, now we go into those meeting rhythms that we spoke about earlier today, which is there's an annual planning day, there's a half-yearly planning day, there's a quarterly planning day, there's a monthly management meeting, there's a weekly management meeting, then there's a daily pulse. And so you go, well, they're the big rocks.
So does it amaze you that people go, geez, that sounds like a lot, but yet they're prepared to scroll 90 minutes a day on social media?
Totally.
And it's just like literally, so, so I just want you to plan the rest of your life, or at least the next year. Could I get you to spend 90 minutes on that? Oh, man, I don't have time for that. Yeah, but you got 90 minutes to actually scroll on Insta and TikTok and Facebook and all those other things. And this is about like literally really living a life on purpose and by design is actually about making the decisions about what's important to you and making the decision to go and chase them.
Yeah, and so I think that those big rocks, they really are the rhythms of success, whether that be at an individual or a company level. And then the part that most people don't want to hear about, because we live in a culture that is very counter to that, is not something that happens with one post. It's not something that happens overnight. If you can lock in those big rocks and you're prepared to do it for a decade or two or even better, 3, and we spoke about saying, being great is not about one isolated moment of brilliance. But if you can live a life where you are consistently good for a long period of time and you stack it day in, day out, that flywheel gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And before you know it, you wake up, you've been in business for 12 years and you've got a great business and you've got a great personal life and all those sort of things.
Feeling good and ready for more? Thanks for joining us
On Dream Big,
Move Fast.